Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the Monday Night Review. I hope that those of you who have just had half term survived and you had a suitably spooky Halloween. I am back recording at my desk after what feels like months of not being able to get into my office or having to use my office as a TV room and shared with my husband. It's so nice just in time to have to pack it up to move, but still, I love my office. It's a pleasure to be back. It's my eldest's 9th birthday today, so I'm trying to get this all done in good time. And I got to watch one of my favourite films last night. My kids are too scared of the Disney Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Ichabod and Mr. Toad, so I have to watch it while they're out, and they went out trick-or-treating last night, and I stayed in to hand out sweeties, and I think all the kids were a bit confused as to why a mum on her own would be watching that Disney by herself, but that's how it is. So although I have a huge list of topics that I want to talk about on this podcast, and I really love it when I get listener suggestions, so please send me a message if you have something you'd like me to cover. A lot of what I do depends on my mood at the time. I've got halfway through writing something and researching it and then being like, I'm just not in the mood for this. So I was feeling a bit like I didn't know what to do for this week's episode. And then I searched through my list and I came up with this. So today we're going to be talking about Terry Jo Dupperault and the tragedy of the Bluebelle. On November the 16th, 1961, in the Northwest Providence Channel, which is near Florida, the second mate on the Greek freighter Captain Theo saw something floating in the water. They initially think it's a fishing boat, but as they get closer, they realise it's not. It's a small white oblong raft, about 2 foot by 5 foot, carrying a young blonde-haired child dressed in white cotton blouse and pink corduroy trousers. She's leaning backwards and waving feebly and looks to be on the brink of death. So the captain orders the freighter's engines to be stopped. A life raft is lowered. There are sharks circling close to the float that this girl's on, so the crew members shout at her not to jump in the water, and one of the crew members lifts her onto the raft they've thrown out, and then she's hoisted onto the captain, Theo, and placed in a spare cabin. But who was this girl, and why is she floating in the middle of the sea? Well, she had been in the water for about 82 hours, but it started before that. The girl in the boat is 11-year-old Terry Jo Dupperault. She's the daughter of 40-year-old Dr. Arthur Dupperault, who's a successful optometrist, and his wife, Jean, who's 38, and she has other siblings. She's got a brother called Brian, who's 14, and a little sister called Renee, who's 7. The family live in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Dr. Dupperault had long dreamed of taking his wife and children for a family cruise from the Florida Keys to the Bahamas. He'd sailed there during his service in the Second World War, and he dreamed of returning there on a family vacation and had been saving up for ages to get this trip. By the summer of 1961, they've saved enough money to finance this cruise. They plan to spend a week living at sea aboard a chartered yacht, lovely warm climate. They're going to dock at several chosen places, and they have the option to extend the holiday if they want to. Green Bay is very cold during the winter, so it's going to be a lovely, sunny winter holiday. So the family arrive in Fort Lauderdale in early November. They charter a 60-foot ketch called the Bluebelle, which is stationed at the Bahia Mar Marina. This cost them $515. And Dr. Dupperault hires a well-known local yachtsman, 44-year-old Julian Harvey. He's also a World War II veteran, and some accounts say that the two men had a slight acquaintance. Harvey's hired as skipper for £100 a day, and his sixth wife, 34-year-old former stewardess and aspiring writer Mary Dean, is also going to go with them and be the cook on the trip. So on Wednesday, the 8th of November, they board the Bluebelle and they leave the port in early afternoon. Harvey wants them to travel through the night, which they think is a bit weird, but he's the expert, so they just do what he says. They have a lovely first 4 days, visiting a few places that they've chosen, snorkeling, and basically doing the stuff that you do if you're holidaying on a yacht. On the 12th of November, which is their last night, they eat supper. They are preparing to return to Florida. 11-year-old Terry Jo goes downstairs to bed in the cabin that she shares with her sister and leaves her family and the Harveys on deck finishing supper. That's November the 12th. At approximately 12:35 p.m. on Monday the 13th of November, a crew member aboard the oil tanker Gulf Lion observes a man waving frantically from a dinghy drifting in their direction and shouting, "Help, I have a dead baby on board." Pulling the man on board, they see there's the body of a young red-haired little girl wearing a life jacket inside the dinghy. And this man is Julian Harvey, the skipper of the Bluebelle. He then goes on to explain that at approximately 8:30 the previous night, his small vessel's been hit by a squall, a strong storm in the middle of the sea, and it's caused the Bluebelle to rapidly keel over. The mainmast snapped and injured his wife and Dr. Dupperault. It pierced the ship's hull, and Harvey said he was completely separated from the others by the falling mast and all the rigging. So he attempts to retrieve a wire cutter from his cabin to clear space on the deck, but a sudden fire breaks out and there's nothing he can do to rescue his wife or any of the passengers. He's forced to abandon the boat alone in the dinghy, and then once he's in the dinghy, the body of 7-year-old Renee Dupperault floats past, and he retrieves her body, tries to revive it, and is unsuccessful, but he keeps her body on the raft out of respect. So an autopsy later confirms that the child has died of drowning. The crew on the boat that have picked him up think he's remarkably calm for someone who's just experienced something so traumatic. But as we all know, everyone responds and reacts to things differently. So he's taken to Nassau and questioned by authorities. Again, they think he's really calm. But also in the dinghy that he's found in, there's a load of survival supplies. It doesn't look like someone who's left a sinking ship fighting through a storm, having just had to leave his wife and friends to drown. So 3 days later, the captain, Theo, comes across this strange sight of a little girl in the raft in the middle of the sea. They get her on board. And when they get her on board, she's incoherent. She's barely able to speak. She's given water and orange juice. They have to sponge salt from her body with wet towels. She's able to identify herself as 11-year-old Terry Jo Dupperault. She says she's been floating on the dinghy on the float for several days after the sinking of her boat that her family was on. She then gets weaker and lapses into a semi-comatose state. So the crew of the Captain Theo don't retrieve the float. They're too busy dealing with the girl. But the Coast Guard goes out later and does locate it and retrieves it from the ocean. And they say that the raft's basically fallen apart as soon as it gets picked up by the Coast Guard who handles it. It basically starts to disintegrate in his hands. Terry Jo's suffering from severe sunburn, dehydration and exposure. She's airlifted to hospital in a critical state, and it's 2 days before she's able to tell the police exactly what happened. So this is her version of events. Late on November the 12th, the Bluebelle began its return journey to Fort Lauderdale, and Terry Jo's gone to bed at around 9 p.m. Leaving everyone else on deck. She goes to sleep, but then she's later awakened by the sound of her brother screaming and calling for his father, and she hears heavy footfalls. She decides to go up and investigate. She gets up on deck and she sees the bodies of her brother and her mother in the main cabin lying in pools of blood. She walks out further onto the deck and she then sees Harvey carrying a bucket. He comes over and hits her and shoves her below deck, shouting, "Get back down there." She's terrified. She returns to her cabin and sits on her bed, obviously in shock, until she then realises that there's oil and water beginning to gush into her cabin under the door. Harvey then opens the door and stands there. He's got a rifle in his hand. They make eye contact. He doesn't do anything. He just returns back to deck. Some accounts say she asks him if the boat is sinking and he says yes. She then hears hammering sounds. So she sits there until the water's up to the bunk and she then returns to the deck. She sees Harvey standing with the Bluebelle's dinghy floating off the side of the boat. He orders her to hold the rope while he goes and gets something, but the rope slips through her fingers, and when he returns and sees that the dinghy's floating off, he dives overboard and swims out to the dinghy and leaves her on a sinking boat. So amazingly, Terry Jo then remembers that there's this little oblong float attached to the deck on the other side that her dad showed her a couple of days before. So she goes and unties this float and swims out into the ocean, pushing it in front of her because the Bluebelle is about to go underwater and she doesn't want to get sucked under. She then climbs on, where she then drifts in the sea for almost 3.5 days. She's got no food or water or any form of shelter. At one point, a plane flies over. She takes off her shirt and waves with it. The plane comes back and flies over her again, and she thinks she's been seen. She can read the writing on the underside of the plane, but she realises that they haven't seen her. All the time she's praying for rescue. She's in and out of consciousness. And at one point, a group of porpoises join her and swim with her for hours. And she recalls being really thankful for their company and feels like a prayer, in a way, has been answered. So when she's first interviewed, she's adamant that the mast of the Bluebelle was intact. There had been no fire on the vessel and the sea was calm. There was no storm. She gets told that Harvey's been picked up alive 3 days earlier and that he was with her sister's dead body, and that the bodies of her brother and Harvey's wife and her parents have all been lost at sea. That she's able to speak to them on the 18th of November. On the 16th of November, Harvey reiterates his statement that he initially gave. There was a storm, the mast broke, fire started, everyone dies. On the 17th of November, he's told that Terry Jo has been found and that she'll soon be well enough to talk to the police. And he exclaims, "Oh my God." And then quickly afterwards goes, "Isn't that wonderful?" He gets told, they tell him that they're going to launch an investigation into the sinking of the Bluebelle and the deaths of the family and his wife. And he immediately stands up and asks to be excused from the interrogation, saying he's tired and he needs to speak to his wife's family. So Harvey then drives a short distance to the Sandman Motel, where he checks in under the assumed name of John Monroe. He writes a 2-page note to a friend of his and goes into the bathroom and slashes his thigh, ankles and jugular vein with a razor blade. His body's found by a maid a couple of hours later. The suicide note, which is addressed to a close friend of his from their days in the military, is found on the dresser. And there's no explanation or apology in it. He just says, I got too tired and nervous, I couldn't stand it any longer. It asks the man to look after Harvey's 14-year-old son, Lance, and requests that Harvey is himself buried at sea. So a full-scale investigation is launched and they look into Harvey's background. And this isn't the first boat that has sunk. One of his boats has previously sunk after running into a submerged wreckage of a warship near Chesapeake Bay. Crew members at the time had warned Harvey to steer clear of the wreckage, and he had repeatedly navigated his vessel into the site, and he claimed to the crew's passengers that he was attempting to read the inscription on the buoy marking the site, but everyone felt it was very odd behaviour. His own powerboat, the Valiant, had also sunk under suspicious circumstances off the coast of Cuba in 1958. So, though he was a decorated World War II veteran and Korean War pilot, he did have a habit of ditching missions due to engine troubles. Like many, after fighting in a war, he had difficulty holding down a job for any length of time, and that in turn caused serious financial problems. He had a tic and a stutter, and it was known to his friends that his nerves were shot after the war. He was a really handsome man, and he was known for having affairs at the airport base where he lived with his second or third wife. It's hard to keep track of his wives. He'd survived a 1949 car accident where the car he was driving plunged off a bridge into a bayou on a rainy night, and he had got out and swum to safety and left his second wife and her mother to drown. He told rescue teams that he'd jumped out of the vehicle in mid-air, made it sound like he was sort of Superman and what an incredible thing it was that he'd done, even though that this was later disproved that that's not how he got out of the car. And it was also, they were able to determine that he did nothing to help his wife or his mother-in-law. So it basically looks like it was deliberate. All of these losses and tragedies had yielded large insurance settlements from which he'd benefited. He'd recently arranged a double indemnity insurance policy on the life of his wife 2 months after their marriage in July 1961. So all this is happening in November 1961. A month before the Dupperault family chartered the Bluebelle, so October, September time, Harvey had been hired by the boat's owner to take tourists to sea on cruises, and so for that he'd get paid £300 a month and have free accommodation on board the Bluebelle. So it may be that this formulated Harvey's plan to murder his wife at sea and then claim that she'd vanished. He probably thought that he would have witnesses to corroborate his claims that she was there and then she disappeared. So his first chartered clients were the Dupperault family. He seems to have difficult tendencies. He left a few of his wives by literally just saying to them he'd get engaged and married very quickly, and then a few months later would just walk in and say to them, "I don't love you anymore," and that would be that. So the conclusion of the inquiry was that Harvey had planned to kill his wife to get her $20,000 double indemnity insurance policy, which would yield double the insured sum if she died accidentally. However, they believe that he may have been seen by someone, possibly Dupperault, either in the act of murdering his wife or disposing of her body. He then went all out and killed Dupperault, his wife, and 2 of his children. We'll never really know how it happened, who saw what. The shitbag probably retrieved Renee's body from the ocean to add credibility to his story. So they say that if Harvey had not committed suicide, he would have been prosecuted for the murder of all those who had died on the Bluebelle and the attempted murder of Terry Jo. Terry Jo went to live with her paternal grandmother and her cousins, and, as was the done thing at the time, retrieved no trauma counselling. She just was sort of left to get on with it. She refused to part with the shirt and trousers she was wearing when she was rescued. She changed her name, and she didn't speak about the loss of her family for 20 years. She married, she had 3 children, and in 2010 she did release a book telling her story. So one of the things that is really weird about this is, why did Harvey not kill Terry Jo? He had multiple opportunities. She'd seen the bodies of her brother and mother, she'd seen him with a gun. Some accounts, she was given a truth serum, and whilst being interviewed under the truth serum, she recalled seeing him holding a knife. So some believe he subconsciously wanted to be caught. Others think he was planning on killing her when she let go of the rope, but he had to go for the dinghy. I think if he was going to kill her, he would have done it when she first went up on deck. Terry Joe states that he originally intended to discreetly murder his wife and dispose of her body, later to claim that she was lost at sea, but the wife probably fought her husband, attracting the attention of the family, and that's when it all went wrong. And I think he probably... I don't know, I find it odd because he's already killed at least... 4 people. So we know that he killed his wife, Terry Jo's mother, her brother Brian. Renee definitely died of drowning, but we can possibly assume that he maybe pushed her overboard, that there was no sign of the violence on other people, and whether that would have been found on other people, whether that was deliberately done to corroborate his story. Here's one body who drowned, so it makes sense that the others had met the same fate. It just seems very odd if you've brutally murdered at least 4 people to not finish the last person off. And although he probably knew that she would go down with the ship, it just seems odd to me that he can stand in her doorway with a gun, not do it. Anyway, so that is in both ways, terrifyingly awful and kind of heartwarming, because she is just incredible to be so quick thinking and bright to get herself to safety. And the fact that she was in shark-infested waters, she couldn't lie down on her raft, she must have just been at the end of her tether. And that is the story of Terry Jo Dupperault and the Bluebelle. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe if you don't already. It makes such a difference to me and the podcast. I always love to hear from you. We're at The Monday Night Revue on Facebook and Instagram. And you can send us an email at themondaynightrevue@gmail.com. And you can buy us a coffee or a book if you so choose. There is a link to that in the show notes. And as always, stay safe, be kind, and always check the back seat before you drive.